All right, everyone. Well, thank you for joining us for How to Start a Podcast. For today, we are going to send a copy of the PowerPoint as well as the recording. So you will have that after the presentation. And then if you have any questions, definitely use the chat function, and then we'll get to the questions as we can. All right. So before we get too far in, if you could do the next slide, Ashlee. Yep, so we do have to read this disclaimer before we get going. So I'll go ahead and start with that. The information provided in this webinar and any supplementary materials provided to registrants are intended for educational and informational purposes only and does not constitute professional, financial, or legal advice. No registrant should act or fail to act on the basis of any material contained in this webinar without obtaining proper financial, legal, or other professional advice specific to their situation. The Northern California Small Business Development Center and its host, the HSU Sponsored Programs Foundation, specifically disclaims any liability, loss, or risk, personal or otherwise, which is incurred as a consequence, directly or indirectly, of the use and application of any of the information presented in this webinar. All right, and then so just a little bit about us here at the Small Business Development Center. So we are a nonprofit organization funded by your tax dollars. So Ashlee, if you want to hit the next slide. So most of what we do is going to be confidential, no-cost one-on-one advising. And then we also provide training such as this one, either for low or no cost. So our purpose is to support small businesses. We want to see you thrive and succeed in your business venture. So however we can do that with our business advising, we're happy to do so. So we are funded in part by the SBA as well as the state of California. All right, and then our presenter today is going to be Ashlee Tate for our How to Start a Podcast. So I will go ahead and hand it over. And then you are still muted, Ashlee.
I'm unmuted. All right. Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for being here today. We are hoping to give you some information so that you can start a podcast. And I'm an online business coach who teaches creatives, entrepreneurs, and nonprofit founders how to use the online space to amplify their message so that they can build an income to design the life and business that they want. So let's jump into this here.
All right, then Ashlee, you got muted again somehow.
Okay, sorry, you guys. So on the agenda today, we're going to talk about why you should start a podcast, how to plan your podcast, the equipment that you'll need. There are some tips for recording, editing your episodes, marketing your podcast, and then understanding how to monetize your podcast and make money from it. So by the end of this course, you will be able to effectively plan and launch your first podcast. All right. Now, before we begin, I just want to obviously tell you why I'm here and how you want to be able to introduce yourself and your business or your podcast idea, and then your reason for being here. So when you start your podcast, you're going to want to be able to explain to people your whole goal of your podcast and why you have this idea and get it going. So what I'm talking about in this case is you have a business and it needs to somehow align with your podcast idea if you want it to then be monetized and make money for your business. So I would write down a podcast idea. And if you want, you can add this into the chat if you want to discuss it or see if it's a good enough idea for getting started. But anything that's going to lead back to your business is a great way to think about in relation to a podcast idea. So why you should start a podcast. So here is the reason why you should start a podcast. If you're somebody who enjoys speaking or relaying your ideas in an audio format, and you want to reach people all across the world, A podcast is a great reason to get started. And it's a way to expand your business and let other people know about your ideas and let other people know about your philosophies, what your business does, sort of the intricacies about your business. And you have to remember that when people are listening to you, they are doing many other things. They might be driving to work. They might be washing dishes. They might be doing other activities. And so it's a way for you to connect with people, even when you don't have maybe their undivided attention. They're not maybe sitting and watching you like they would on a YouTube channel or reading you like they would on a blog or a website. So a podcast is a great way to be in with someone and creating that relationship over time, even though you may not have their undivided attention, because people want to get that information over time. Another reason to start a podcast would be for creating another revenue source for yourself. And we'll talk about that, like I said, in the monetizing space or section of this podcast. But starting a podcast is a great way to create another revenue stream for your business. And it can also be a way to position yourself as an expert in your field. And that's a number one reason that a lot of people go into creating a podcast. Because of the reasons that I said, you're able to reach people in a way that you might not be able to in your local area, and to provide your philosophies and the way that you do business and what makes you unique and different. You're able to reach that target audience much faster. And when I say faster, I mean more efficiently, because building a podcast does take time, and you do have to market it and help people find out who you are and trust you, and you have to build that trust over time. So it really is a way to build a relationship, as I said before. The other thing you want to keep in mind is that there are over 850,000 active podcast listeners. So just like when I say around the world, people will hear about your podcast, and you'll be in the ears of people that you may have never otherwise been able to reach. So what are your goals in starting your podcast? Now, this is an important thing to ask yourself, because it does take time and it will take effort. And you really need to understand where the podcast fits within your business landscape overall. Planning your podcast is part of understanding the goal of your podcast. So when you're creating your podcast, understanding and planning it out so that it fits nicely inside of your business landscape is one of the things that we're going to talk about in this section. So in order to plan a successful podcast, like I said, you need to understand your goals. So is this something that you want to make money with? Is this something that you just want to get more people to see your business from? Like, you want to expand your business and you want to reach more people? Understanding how your podcast is going to be digested and how we're going to create that. And I'll talk to you guys about that in just a second. Knowing what your podcast is going to be about. So if you're someone who wants to become a speaker and you're using your podcast as a stepping stone, then some of the things you might want to talk about, you're going to need to know what are big stage topics that people talk about, and how can my podcast be a nice dovetail into those things. And who you're talking to is a huge piece of creating your planning out your podcast. So understanding who your target audience is and understanding what they want to know, why they're listening to your podcast, what sort of transformation you're trying to give them through your podcast is going to be a huge piece of how you create your goals in starting your podcast. So when we're thinking about the goals that you're using, you want to ask yourself, what section of the podcast landscape do I want to be in? And what am I hoping that from each episode, people will take action to actually do something inside of your business, or who you're actually trying to reach? So when we write down our goals, we want to talk about who your target audience is, who do you actually want to listen to your podcast? Because everything that you do in this planning phase does end up coming back to your goals and what you write down here. So who do you want to listen to your podcast? Do you want to make money from your podcast? And how does it align with your business goals that you already have inside of your business, or that the business that you're trying, or inside of the business that you're trying to create, if you don't have one yet? What will your podcast be about? So some of the top podcast topics are society and culture, business, community and communications, comedy, politics, health. There are so many fitness podcasts. There are so many podcasts out there. You can really come up with anything you'd like personally to come up with, but you will want to be nestled underneath a major category. And so you have to think about, when you're planning your podcast, what piece of your business falls into one of the major topics that are out there. And I would recommend that you really look through a podcast publishing site like Apple Podcasts or something, and just look up some of the topics that are there to see where your business falls, or where your podcast idea falls into, so that you kind of have an idea of where the broader topics are and how to talk about your podcast once you start to market it. So your podcast format is another piece that can be changed, and you can start out one way, and you can shift and evolve into many different types of podcast formats. However, one thing I do want to caution you is that when people are listening to your podcast, they do get used to a sort of rhythm. So that's why this part is so important, because you want to figure out if you enjoy doing solo episodes where you just are on there by yourself and you are talking to your audience and you're giving them some sort of information. Like I said, this would be something like your philosophy. This would be something talking about things that you do inside of your business. But everything that you're talking about needs to be helpful to the listener. And that's the key. So anytime you're creating a podcast episode, whether it's through solo episodes, whether it's through storytelling or guest interviews, or some sort of mix of all of those, ask yourself for every single episode, is this helping my client? Is this helping my target audience? Is this giving the transformation or accomplishing the goal that they set out to hear and listen to? Because your titles are going to say a lot, and people are going to click your titles, and that's what they want to hear. That's what they want to learn about. And that's the information that they want. So if you're doing solo episodes, it's a little bit easier to go off on tangents and not stay focused on what your goal was of the initial episode when you started up. And so it's really important to make sure that you are focused on what your customer actually wants when they are listening to your podcast. So choose from one of these formats. Generally, it's solo episodes, storytelling. Storytelling is a big space inside of podcasting. Guest interviews. Guest interviews will require you to spend a little bit more time finding the guest, making sure the guest has the right equipment to record, and obviously scheduling that time with them to meet up and actually do the recording. You need to do you have to prepare some questions beforehand so that you know what to ask the guest, so that you guys are not just sitting there with dead space. All of these can be a lot of fun, but it really is more of an introspective decision to figure out, am I more of a solo episode person? Am I a storyteller? Do I enjoy doing that piece? And am I an interviewer? Is that what I like to do, or some sort of mix? Oops, sorry about that, guys. Oh, that came up. Okay. So this is one of the pieces that I was talking about earlier about going off on a tangent. So you have to determine if you're better on or off script. Some podcasters use a script and they read it word for word, and that's how they record their solo episodes or their guest interviews or their storytelling. They've already written it out and they stay on that script. They record it. They know exactly how long the episode is going to be. And then that's how they ship out their episodes. So some people are much better off the cuff, where they just want to have kind of a stream of thoughts and they're explaining something and they can just do it off the cuff. So you have to figure out what you're most comfortable with and also what your customers actually like or enjoy hearing from your podcast. Okay, how often do you want to release episodes? So releasing episodes, some people do daily podcasts, some people do weekly podcasts, some people do monthly podcasts, quarterly podcasts. You can do whatever you would like to do as far as creating your podcast, because remember, it is your podcast and you can do this. But I do want to caution you that whatever you decide to do, it is best to stay on a schedule. Like, okay, guys, I'll see you next month. So when you close out your last podcast, people know when to expect to hear from you again, or when to expect to see your next podcast come out. Now, when you're getting started, I do want to at least relieve a little bit of pressure in that you may not be, perfect getting them out every single month or every single week or every single day. But you do want to work towards that level of consistency as you grow and as more people come to know who you are and learn about your podcast, so that you can actually give your customers exactly what they're looking for and what they want. Now, interviews. So who should you ask for your interviews? So it is surprising what people will say yes to. So even if you're just getting started, you can say that in your ask to people that you may think might say no. And it is better just to go ahead and ask for someone to actually be on your podcast rather than assume that they're going to say no. And the deal is, when you're asking for interviews, when you're first starting out, absolutely take whoever you can to bring them onto your show, because you never know who will give a great interview and what information you may not have been able to provide that they can provide for your customer. So if you can just keep in mind for all of these aspects of planning your podcast, think about what your customer actually wants. And for some of you, if you don't already have some sort of customer avatar or something that defines who your customer actually is and what they're looking for, the transformation they have, the struggles they have, the pains they have, all of those things. I would also recommend taking the time to write that down for yourself, because it will help you really plan your podcast a little better, and it'll make planning a little easier for you as well, so that you're not just randomly coming up with things that you think people want to know, but you actually know because you've written out your customer avatar and you know who your target audience is and the things that they struggle with, the things that they want to learn. And the better you can marry those two, the better and faster people will find out about your podcast. Okay, so planning your episodes. What will your topic be? Okay, so when you're thinking about your topic, like I said earlier, we really need to think about, what does the audience want to know? Every single episode that you create really needs to be focused on what your customer wants to know, needs to know to move past a certain point that they're struggling with, or something in your business that will help them make progress. Anything like that is a great thing to have for your topic, because that's what people are going to be searching for. So you want to try to match your topic of your episode with what people are actually searching for. So if you can think of yourself when you get on the internet and you go to Google, and whatever you're typing up, how to do X, 5 things I need to know about, fill in the blank. Your job is really to marry what your customers are searching for and what your topic will actually be. So if you can keep that top of mind along with what your customers need, you'll do very well with a podcast. Because one thing you have to remember is that podcasts can be searched online. So if someone types in something, your podcast can pop up from your website or from Google, on Google, to show people like, okay, this person has an episode on this topic. And so it's really important. I mean, I know I'm stressing this a lot, but it is really important to understand your customer, understand what they're searching, and then create your topic idea around that. that is the fastest way for you to build your podcast. So what do you want the audience's reaction to this episode to be? Now, when we're talking about that, this is the transformation that you want your customer to get after listening to your episode. So really, it's reverse engineering your episode. It's understanding, what does your audience reaction, what do you want your audience to get from this episode? And then you create the episode to actually provide that piece for them. And a lot of people will create the episode first and then hope that their customers like it. But to do it truly the right way, you want to make sure that you understand what you want the end result to be and create your episode around that specifically. Now, is there a call to action inside of your episodes? I would say that every time you create an episode, there absolutely should be a call to action, because what that call to action does is it kind of takes people out of the lull of whatever you were teaching in your podcast or whatever you were talking about, and it asks them to take an action. And it's been proven that when people are asked to take an action, they are much more likely to actually take that action than if you never said anything at all, because they're not thinking about doing this on their own. So your call to action could be anything from sign up for your email list. It could be go check out my website. It could be pick up the phone and call my business for whatever you're looking for. And I would change those call to actions unless you have a specific place that you're directing people for each and every episode. And for each and every episode, you want to make sure that you understand, again, where it nestles into your entire business. So if you're catching a customer on a specific piece of their journey through your business, say they've never heard of you before, and they didn't know why they would need flooring. If you're, in the carpet business or something, they didn't know why they would need flooring in their home, but you gave them some new information that could potentially change their minds about why they might need this. Well, then you want to follow that up with a call to action that says, now that you know why you need X in flooring, make sure to call whatever your business name is and insert that there. And then that's how they take that call to action. So that's what a call to action would look like in your business and in your episodes. Because remember, you are in their ears no matter what they're doing. You have some of their attention and focus, and this is the time for you to not lose that opportunity and really make a call to action. So what key points do you want to make in your episode? Even if you don't write out a full script, it is important to have some key points that you've written down that you want to make sure you touch on for your episode title, number one, for the search that they're going to do, and for what your customer needs in order to make some sort of transformation after listening to your podcast episode. Now, if this is an interview, who do you need to reach out to in order to make this interview work for you, right? In order to get this interview scheduled. And when I say scheduled, you'll want to schedule your interviews out pretty far. And I mean, you could schedule your podcast out 6 months, and you could be interviewing 6 months out before that podcast even is published. And the purpose of that is so that you can stay on track and continue laying out the episodes when they're due instead of falling behind. Because I will tell you that the interviewing podcasts are a lot of fun and people love those types of podcasts. But the only thing that's a limiting factor on that is really the scheduling of the interviews and the post-production time that it takes to actually get that interview up and out. So give yourself ample amount of time. If you're doing once per month, then yeah, having 6 interviews scheduled and recorded, and then putting your podcast out is a great way to do it. Even if you do 3 interviews in advance, and then having a 3-month lead time so that you can send that out. And people are very well aware, people that you interview or guests that appear are very well aware that it might be a couple of months or it might be a month or 2 before their episode comes out. And all you need to do is make sure that they are aware of that so that they can then help you promote it. Okay, so if there's any questions right now during that phase of the presentation, I can take those now.
Okay, so there aren't any in the chat right now, but just a reminder, if you do have questions during the webinar, just put it in the chat and we'll get to it next time we get to a good question spot.
Okay, thank you, Emily. Okay, so now I want to talk about the equipment you'll need. So when it comes to equipment, you can do the bare minimum, or you can go really expensive. So let's get into this. So a lot of the type of equipment that you're going to get, it really is determined by your budget. And like I said, if you want to go bare minimum, you can absolutely do that with some iPhone earphones with a mic on the cord. It's actually a pretty decent mic on there. And then a mid-range would be like the Blue Yeti or a Rode Procaster or Shure SM7B. Now, these are all different types of microphones. They're all pretty decent, but the thing that's going to save you, no matter which one you end up using besides the earphones, is going to be having a pop filter. And what that pop filter does is really, it stops all of the P's that come from any word that has a P in it. So you don't hear the pop from the P, which is why it's called a pop filter. So that's something that would be, I would say, sort of mandatory to have. Sometimes if you don't want to buy the pop filter and you buy a microphone with the sheath over it and it's got like padding and foaming, sometimes that will also be good enough. But I would definitely recommend getting a pop filter over any of these earphones or microphones. The next thing that you can do, which a lot of new podcasters do, is they will record inside of a closet or somewhere where you're not in an open room, so that the acoustics aren't bouncing off of walls and kind of reverberating into your recording. And you can often tell if you're listening to your own podcast or someone else's podcast, you can often tell how nice the quality of the sound is. Now, remember that your first impression is the sound. So you don't have any other, there's nothing else that people can use to kind of filter the information that you're giving them and the way that they're getting the information. Like, they can't look at you because this isn't a video podcast. They can't look at you. And so all they can do is listen. So if listening to you is already tough, it's hurting their ears, or it's there's something very annoying about, the sound or the acoustics, people may not stay on your podcast very long. So if you're going to invest in anything, like I said, the pop filter would be the best. And then you can also like put padding around you so that it'll take away the reverberation. So let's say you are in a big room, you could have like pillows or things around you, or you could put some sort of padding or foam on your walls if you wanted to, and just bringing things closer to your area. So some people will put like chairs around them and they will lay clothes over them to kind of help with the sound. That does work, surprisingly, but it does work. And so this is if you're doing it on a real budget. But if you're not doing it on a major budget and you want to do it right, definitely getting a good mic is awesome. A pop filter is great. And then also keeping your hands and your body away from whatever desk or surface you're recording on, because hitting the desk and electronics running, any of that stuff, people can hear when you're actually recording. So we just want to make sure we're in a quiet space with not as much reverberation. That's kind of the key here. All right, so headphones are great just to have over your head so that when you're talking, you can hear yourself as well. So the iPhone earphones, again, and then the Audio Technica, Skull Candy, it's a little cheaper. And then there's Amazon headphones. So just any headphones to kind of like make sure that, you can hear how you sound and also take away like any outside noise for yourself. So let's talk about editing software. Now, this can be as in depth as you'd like. If you're somebody who's excellent at editing, there's lots of options for you. But to go very basic, GarageBand is already on a lot of Macs, and you can use that. You can also download that, I believe, for Microsoft. Logic Pro is another one, Adobe Audition or Audacity. These are all editing softwares that you can upload your audio into. And also, as we get into a little further, there are some softwares in general that have all of this included, where you can actually edit inside the software and launch your podcast directly from there. If you're somebody who needs that as well, like maybe you don't want to have to use this editing software. But for those of you that want to go a little bit deeper and cut out some of the ums and ahs, you can use some of these editing softwares here. Okay, let me see if I can move this out of the way real quick. So some of the equipment that is available for you to use would be Zoom and Riverside FM. Now, what this allows you to do is actually to record the podcast, or if you're going to have a guest on, both Zoom and Riverside FM are great for this. Now, Riverside FM has kind of billed itself as the main, as a good platform for interviews and for podcast specific types of recordings and guest recordings. And the reason for that is because what it does is when you're recording someone else on their in their space, like say, you're doing it via Zoom and they're on their computer and you're on your computer and you guys are recording. What Riverside FM will do, and Zoom has the capability of doing, is that it will record each of you onto your own drive, and it will record it separately. So what you'll find if you just turn on Zoom and you try to record a podcast recording that way, some of the sound's not going to sound right once you download it, unless you change some of the settings. And then you will get one main recording for all of it. And when you're doing one main recording for all of it, say your guest does something or makes a sound on their end, well, then when you go to cut that piece out, it also cuts your piece out as well. So if you're talking and your guest makes a mistake, or you make a mistake on your end, you hit your microphone and you want to take that out of your podcast, it's just really difficult to do. And it takes out both sides of the conversation. When it's recorded separately like that, and you want to correct one piece, say your interview, your guest is saying a lot of ahs and ums, and you want to remove that on their end, then you're able to do that when it's recorded and downloaded separately. So that's really the main benefit of using something like Riverside FM, or understanding the Zoom changes that you need to make in order to have them recorded separately. And there is the capability of doing that via Zoom. But that's a little deeper for this podcasting webinar. So what is a podcast host? Now, the podcast host is essentially where your podcast is going to be held. So if you can think of this like YouTube holds all of the videos that we watch on YouTube, and they can be moved and used other places. Those links can be sent to other places, and it can be embedded on your website, and it can be, there's lots of different things that you can do with YouTube. YouTube is the host, the video platform host. The podcast host is going to be something like anchor.fm, and Anchor, I believe you can start for free. And I believe you can record directly into the podcast if you want, directly into the host if you wanted to. And then you can use those links and you can send them wherever you'd like, or have them added to Apple Podcast or Spotify and all these other places. SoundCloud, Buzzsprout, Libsyn, they're all very similar to what I just said. You can record, and then either you take the download that you've recorded from your computer or Zoom or Riverside, wherever you've done the major recording, and then you can upload it to SoundCloud, Buzzsprout, Libsyn, or Anchor. I just know that on Anchor, I think you can record directly onto your phone app and start immediately. So if you're somebody who is like, I just want to start this podcast, I'm just going to do it, which I love. And I think it's a great mindset to have, because in the very beginning, you're going to make mistakes, and it's not going to be perfect. And that's okay, because your business will evolve, and so will your podcast. So for the Anchor piece, I think it's a great way to get practice and get started, and just start. Use the headphones, Start recording, see what type of person you are. If you're someone who needs a script, or you're someone who needs, or someone who just wants to just do it off the cuff, use it. Use Anchor. It's a great way to start. Buzzsprout is another good one. I believe SoundCloud, you need to upload from one of these pieces of equipment, but I think those two pieces of equipment are great if you have guests. So if you don't have a guest and you just want to record a solo or storytelling type of podcast, Anchor is a great place to just get started. Over time, you will probably outgrow Anchor and want to move to something a little more sophisticated that has a lot more options along with it, which would be something like Anchor, SoundCloud, Buzzsprout, or Libsyn. You can go from there. So hard drive space is another piece that we have to talk about, because as you record these episodes and you will be downloading from Zoom and Riverside, you need to make sure that your computer has enough hard drive space to actually keep those recordings there so that you can then upload them to one of these types of podcast hosts. Your website is another place where I would absolutely recommend that you upload your podcast. So after you get it onto one of these hosts, then I would recommend taking that link and embedding it into your website so that when people come to your website and you want to talk to them about whatever your topic was, you can add your show notes down underneath your podcast episode. And if people are just going through your podcast or going through your blog, or you have something on social media and you want to direct them back to your website to listen to a podcast, it's already there and it's embedded. And then lastly, your local podcasting sites. So I'm adding this in because I want to show you, I want to also tell you that there are ways for you to bypass some of the equipment and actually rent out spaces so that you can go record, and they have all of the high-end equipment, and there may be something like that in your area where you can go and just record directly at this place. And then they take care of all of the equipment that you'll need and all of the setup and the sound and the acoustics is set up specifically for podcasting. So there are a lot of places like that as well that you might want to consider if you just want to get it started. But you do have to pay a fee. So you have to weigh out the cost of, should I just have my own equipment, or should I go rent a space to actually, use the equipment there? So that's an option. And do I have any questions at this point for anything we've talked about?
Yeah, so kind of along those lines, some people were asking, if there's a place that you can record a podcast.
Yes. Yeah, so there's a lot of places that you can record podcasts. A lot of them are in big cities at this point. So you'd have to find out in your local area if they have places like this, but a place that you might want to start would be somewhere like a radio station, even like a private personal radio station that people have. Sometimes they now use those studios to record podcasts. And you can even record a video podcast sometimes if you're thinking about putting your podcast on YouTube and using that as another avenue to find and reach people. So there's lots of places that are out there. It just is going to be dependent on your area.
Can I chime in as well?
Absolutely.
I know that in Shasta County locally, our library has set up a really nice recording facility for podcasts. So that may be available to you as well. Check out your library and some of your other local places, maybe your if you have a business accelerator or something like that in town, ask your SBDC. They'll probably have a good idea.
Yes. That's a good point. Thank you, David.
Right, and then we did have another question about how long should a podcast be? Like, what's too long? What's too short?
So what you will find as you start listening to podcasts more and more is that the time is really up to you. So I generally see a lot of podcasts that are about 30 minutes to an hour, but it depends on what information you're putting out. But I've also seen podcasts that are 15 minutes. I've seen podcasts that are like meditations or affirmations that are about 5 minutes. And that's something that they just do on a daily basis. So it really is filling the amount of time with the information that needs to get out. And that's the nice thing about a podcast, is that you don't have to have a specific time limit. It really is, how can I help my customer? How much time do you need to help your customer get through whatever the struggle is, or whatever the point of your podcast is? As much time as it takes you to fill that point is how long your podcast should really be. Anything else, Emily?
Okay, I think that's it for now.
All right, so now we're going to talk about some tips for recording, and we'll dive into this. Let's go. So as I said earlier, you need to be somewhere quiet, because that is really what people are. They're only hearing your voice. That's it. There's nothing else that people are hearing. So it really, if you're doing video, it's a little easier to show people on your face, like, oh, sorry about that mistake, or sorry about this. But when you're only doing audio, people can only hear your voice and your breath. So you want to make sure you're quiet and they don't have a lot of interruptions, because generally it's in their, in their headphones or in their ears that, and things are just a little more exacerbated, these noises. So it doesn't have to be perfect, but that is what editing's for. But one of the things that I do want to show you is the 3-second rule. So stopping for editing cuts helps you. What this does is when you make a mistake, let's just say I just made a mistake, I'm going to stop and I'm going to clap 1, 2, 3. And the reason that you do that is because I can't show you on here, but if you see any of those spikes on this audio on the bottom, it's showing you where the spikes are, and it'll be a big spike. It'll be larger than any of these spikes. But when you clap, that's what the audio takes in. And so you know exactly where to cut. So you don't have to listen to your entire podcast all over again just for editing. You can see exactly where you were. You can go a little before that and a little after it, and you can cut that piece out. And it's all because you just did a clap. So I think a clap is a great thing to use for both your interviews and for your just for your own solo interviewing as well. So echoes, you want to make sure that you do some sort of a test run when you are doing your podcast, just so you can hear, do I have echoes in this room? Do I have echoes in this space? That's something that's really hard to get rid of, and it's throughout your entire podcast recording if you don't acknowledge that you have it, or you don't know that you have it before you start recording the full thing. So I would really stop, do a test run of an episode, see what you hear on the recording, and then try to go back and mitigate those sounds or those echoes to make sure that you've got a good setup for your actual true recording, because that's the worst thing that could possibly happen, which is you record a whole podcast, you didn't realize there was a sound that was, or an echo that was in there, and now you either have to record the entire thing or you have to scrap it. So for little interruptions or little mishaps that happen, absolutely use the 3-second rule and just clap it out, and then go back and edit and take those out. So don't stop recording, just keep recording, and just, if you make a mistake, clap, keep moving, because you can always edit it after. All right, so like I said earlier, you want to turn off any electronics and air conditioning or sounds that you could have in your space. Of course, we don't want to have airplanes, but if airplanes do happen to pass, I would just stop and wait for anything to pass and then keep on recording. Now you don't have to stop the actual recording. You can just keep that recording on there and then cut it out later. And that's the key. Like, you don't have to stop and start your recording. You want to just make sure you actually continue recording no matter what's going on. If you have to wait 10 minutes, if you have to wait 15 minutes, 2 minutes, just stop talking and saying your information and let the recording keep going. because that makes it easier when you go to download it and then cut it. It all just comes back together seamlessly. Okay. When you cut out those gaps. If you don't want to put like, foam on your walls, or you don't want to have all these clothes around you to, mask the sound, and you can find a closet where you can actually go in and record, do that. There's no shame in using your closet. No one knows you're in the closet unless you tell them. And it's actually a really good way to minimize the echoes, which is the worst thing you could have in your podcast. So if you can have a pop filter and you have a closet that you can surround yourself in to actually record, say it's a solo or it's going to be an interview or whatever the case, this is a great way to do that. And if you're going to do interviews, I would actually tell them to do the same thing. You would encourage them to say, hey, that way you don't have to worry about anything. Just go into your closet, bring your recording equipment and sit in there. And that's where we're going to do the actual interview. So it sounds a little crazy, but the best thing you can do is reduce the amount of sound that you have. So the best thing you can possibly do for all of this podcasting, and like I said earlier, for the evolution of your business, the evolution of your podcast, is just go with your own flow. The thing is, you're going to test and see what works best for you, what works best for your schedule, what works best for your clients, what works best for your listeners. You want to make sure that you actually just spend the time to get to know what you want out of your podcast and how the podcast is going to work for your business and your customer. Okay. So, just find a good flow, keep trying, keep testing. And I'm going to tell you right now that the first podcast that you put out is not going to be perfect. So I don't want you guys to expect anything to be perfect when you put it out. But remember this, people generally don't hear your first podcast, not for a long time, until you've already had you've made other podcasts and you've been marketing it and people now are finding out about it. And they might come on and hear your 6th podcast first, where you're sounding really good and everything's perfect. And they might then go back and want to listen to your first podcast. So get some traction and get some podcasts under your belt before you really start to market it, just so that you have a good flow and you know what you're trying to do. And you're happy with maybe the one that you're actually going to put out and market. But do not have like action paralysis. Just go for it and just try and start. That's the best possible thing and information and advice I could give you on creating a podcast. Is everybody had to start somewhere. And so do not paralyze yourself thinking that it has to be perfect on the first, second, third, fourth, 18th try. Just keep moving forward, and eventually it will evolve into something that's better. And if you don't believe me, you can go back to almost any podcast that you listen to, go back to their first episode, and you will hear that there were lots of mistakes that happened. And sometimes people actually go back and they take down their first podcast. If they've done a lot and they're starting to get traction, they'll take down their first podcast that maybe wasn't so great, and they'll re-record it and use that as their next episode, since they know what they're doing and it feels good to them. So please just take off all the perfectionism. It's not going to be perfect. So again, you don't have to re-record your podcast over and over and over. Just do. And keep moving forward. Okay. And like I said earlier, make sure you record your interviews on separate tracks. And the way that you can do that, that's already kind of set up for you, is through Riverside FM. Zoom also has that option. So just take those into account. All right. So editing your episodes. Let's talk about that a little deeper. All right. Like I said earlier, GarageBand, Audacity, Adobe Audition, Fiverr. I've already talked about the other ones, but now I want to talk to you about True Editing, and Fiverr is a great place. If you can afford to have someone edit this for you, Fiverr is a site, fiverr.com, and it's spelled with 2 R's like that, is a place that you can actually send your podcast, and they can go on and they will edit everything for you and then give you back the final product. What that allows you to do is, if you're somebody who can record everything and you can get the guests, you can do all the things, but you don't want to spend the time maybe editing, or you feel like you're not very good at editing, or you don't have the time to learn how to edit, this is an option that you can use. And they are experts at doing this. And oftentimes they are relatively cheap. And they call it Fiverr because it started out where it was just like $5 for you to get things like this done. And there are people who are just starting out who still do it for $5, and you would be taking a chance with them, but you can read reviews, you can talk to them, you can tell them exactly what you want, and it's for a relatively low price. So that is something that is an option for you. GarageBand, like I said earlier, is on your actual computer. If you have a Mac, Audacity and Adobe Audition, those are things I think you actually need to purchase to have on your computer for an editing software. And then also, like I mentioned earlier, you can also, in some of those platforms like Buzzsprout, oh gosh, I can't remember the one I just said earlier. The one that I said was free. I can't think of it right now. I'm sorry, you guys. But that one also, I think you can record in there and then also edit directly into these places. So the biggest thing about all of this with podcasting is to remove the noise. And you're going to make sure that you don't have any major frequencies or bumps that are going to disturb the listener when they're listening to you in their ears, on their headphones, or in their car. So you just want to make sure you don't have like a lot of different things going on, because they don't have any other way to process that noise, because it's just pure audio. So I just want you to remember that. For the experts out there, if you guys already know how to do this audio, you guys can play around with the reverb and the compression and all of that. That is way out of my space. So hats off to those of you that can do that. And then, like I said, for Riverside and anything like that, you can remove the sound when they are separate, when the audios have been separated. You can remove the sound on one person without affecting the entire interview. And that's a really big piece of how some of these interviews are done so well. So yeah, those things are all options for you. And one thing I want to say before I move into the marketing your podcast piece, in relation to editing and getting a good idea of how you want to plan your podcast and set it all up, is also go and listen to podcasts. Like if you're thinking about making a podcast, go listen to podcasts and figure out like a flow that you like, or you'll see that people have kind of a standard layout of how they do their podcast that their customers really come to know and they come to expect. And really think about like, what is it? Why do I like this podcast? Do I like the way that they did their intro? Do I like the way that they sound? Do I like their cadence or their pace? Do I like the way that they edited it? Do I like their intro? Ask yourself all of those questions when you're listening to different podcasts out there. And I would say, really listen to different podcasts, different genres, different business podcasts, different people, and get a good idea of what you like and what you don't like, because understanding that will help you build a better podcast for yourself, and also give you a way to think about a unique selling proposition for yourself. How your podcast is a little different from maybe someone else who talks about a similar thing. If you're funny, bring all of that in there too. Like add in your own personality to really allow people to come to know you and enjoy your podcast. Okay, so marketing your podcast. The first thing is, when you're doing interviews, the nice thing about interviews is a lot of people will call these collaborations, because you're able to leverage your guest audiences. And really what that allows you to do is reach an audience that already loves your guest, potentially. And even if they don't really love your guest, it's an audience that you would not have had access to without having this person also help you market it. So what that really means is, people love to talk about themselves, and they love to talk about the amazingness of themselves, right? So let's say you bring on a guest, even if it's a small, not so well-known guest, let's say, they have an audience of their own, and they're going to go tell their audience, hey guys, I was on a podcast recently and I'd love for you to go listen to it. I just did an interview, or I was asked to interview. I was asked to be interviewed. Sorry, you guys, can't talk today. I was asked to be interviewed on this podcast. That's where the name of your podcast goes in, right? I was asked to be interviewed on John's podcast. And whatever you guys talked about on there, really try to make it about the guest. Remember that the guest is the focus of that podcast. And so you want to pull out a lot of information from the guests. You really want to focus on them, and you want to focus on even asking them beforehand, like, what's something that you want to get out? Maybe they've written a book and they want to talk about their book. Your audience is like a new platform for them as well, which is why we call it a collaboration. Because even though you're providing the platform for your guests to come and speak, they know that they're now going to have access to your new audience, because your audience is going to hear about them. And you know that by the sheer fact that he's on your podcast, you're going to then have leverage with their audience. So that's why having an interview or something like that is such a good, that's why it works out so well for podcasters, because they are leveraging each other's guests or audiences, and they're able to kind of be seen by other people that maybe they wouldn't have. So let's say you're in business, you have a business podcast, and you talk to someone else about, and they talk to you about self-improvement. Now your business has had access to an audience that's all about self-improvement, that may have been thinking about starting a business. And now your podcast talking about startup businesses is really what they needed at the time, right? But they had no idea about you before you brought on this guest. So always think about that. You are leveraging your guests' audiences. It's really important to realize the whole goal and the purpose of your podcast platform and how it can be used no matter what you're putting out there. So that brings me to SEO. So what we talk about with SEO this is called search engine optimization. Now, remember when I told you before you even create your title, you need to understand how this fits into your business, how it fits into the greater landscape of the internet, and how people search. So when people go to search online, they are not focused on search engine optimization, but Google has made it so that we as creators, we can get in front of these people who are searching when we understand how and what they are searching. So if I'm someone who talks about business all the time, I know that most people will write how to start a business. Or if I'm going to create something about podcasts, I know that most people are going to write in how to start a podcast. And if I can write for my title, how to start a podcast, then I have a better opportunity to get in front of the type of audience that I want and the type of customer that I'm looking for. And if I write in how to start a business, I know that I'm going to be reaching people at a specific place on their journey, so that then I can give them the information that they want. So you're trying to marry up your information with what they're searching. Okay. So every podcast episode is a new opportunity to be found via SEO. So really take your time when you're thinking about what you're going to say in your podcast, how you're going to say it. Really think about that time frame. Okay. I mean, not that time frame. Think about that marrying between the two. What are they searching when they are up at 2 a.m. and they're searching for how to start a business, or what type of carpet should I use, or whatever? Try to make your title exactly what they're searching, so that you can marry those two. Okay. I will get off my horse on that one. Okay. So for organic social media, so social media is great. And I want you to think about social media as more of an optimizer rather than the place to start. If you create a podcast, you're creating sustainable working content for your business. And what that means is this content will always be sitting out there and working for you over time. Whereas with social media, where a lot of people tend to focus their time and effort, social media is more of a one-time, like, fast content. Like, you know, they say fast fashion because it's like it's in and then it's out. It's no longer really working for you. It's not doing anything. That's how social media really is. So if you take your podcast, like a clip of your podcast, which you can do, and I know for sure you can do this in Buzzsprout. I think you can do it in some of the other platforms that I talked to you about, as far as like the podcast host. if you take the link from those hosts, you can share it on social media, which is great to kind of just get eyeballs on it, hopefully. And maybe they'll click to go there. But another way to actually work with your social media is to create snippets from your podcast. And a snippet would be something like you talking about maybe one point in your podcast episode, a short point. So maybe 15 to 30 seconds of your podcast episode. And basically it's just a screen with an audio piece that's moving through the screen. And then you have some sort of background, which most people would put their podcast art there. And then people can just listen when they scroll through your social media. So that's one way to kind of leverage social media to optimize the content that you've already made. So that's sustainable content that's there forever. Like when you make a podcast, it's there forever. You recorded one time, you spent your time, you made it, but now you can repurpose that many different times, and you can do cross-platform snippets, or you can use it for paid social media or organic social media, whichever way you'd like to go. So paid social media, I just wanted to touch on this really quick. So let's say you have paid social media, and that means like you've taken out an ad to talk about maybe you had a guest on there and you want to highlight the guest. And so you paid for an ad to talk about the guests that you had on your podcast, and maybe a few topics that they talked about to hopefully entice your customer base or your target audience to come and watch that full episode. So that's great. But you just paid for them to it's a hopeful thing for them to actually go and see it. But it is a good option if you know your target audience really well, and you know what they want to know and how you need to say it. And then you do the paid social media, directing them back to your website link, wherever you've linked your or embedded your podcast. That's the best way to use paid social media. Okay. So if you're going to use it for a piece of content, and I could go deeper into that, we won't do that today, but yeah, paid social media is an option. Organic social media, again, remember it as an optimizer. It's something that's going to optimize putting that content out there for people to see. And you can use like 5 different snippets of your podcast episode, and you can put those out there like that. So when I talk about cross-platform snippets, what that means is, say I take one of those 5 snippets of my podcast that are 15 seconds long, I can put that snippet on Facebook, I can put it on LinkedIn, I can put it on Twitter, I can put it on Instagram, I can put it all over in all these different areas to try to reach people and give them a taste of what my podcast is about, or this specific episode, what that podcast is about. And then also it's sitting on, when you submit your podcast to all of these different places, like Apple Podcast, Spotify, all of these different platforms or hosts. Some people use that word interchangeably. So when you put them in these different areas, they're also sitting there too. So people can happen upon your podcast by searching Apple Podcasts and looking up a business podcast, or looking up a self-development podcast, or looking up a society's topic podcast, or whatever. So there are lots of different ways that you can get your information out there and get your podcast marketed. But the 2 main things I want you to think about are leveraging your guest audience and your SEO, your search engine optimization, because really that is how you will get found via a podcast. The other things that I have here are ways to maximize your marketing efforts, but it's not the way that people are generally going to find them. Because as you know, when you put something on social media, you see it and then you keep scrolling, and then you may not see it again because you've already seen it according to Facebook, Instagram, all of those places. So they don't need to show it to you again. They want to keep showing you new content. So that's why I call it fast content as opposed to sustainable content, which is something like a podcast where it can be found via SEO, and it can be used across multiple platforms and used over and over again. Because even a year from now, if you take a snippet from your podcast that you created today, it still is something new to your viewers and to your list, and not to your listeners, but to your social media followers. It's still new to them. They don't know unless they listen to the full podcast. So there's a lot there. So marketing your podcast also comes from reviews, right? So on podcast platforms that house your podcast, like Apple Podcasts, Spotify, those types of things, they have ways for people to review your podcast. And what that does is it shows people, hey, I love this podcast. I've been listening to it for a long time. This person has a lot of good information. All of those types of things. That's what comes from the reviews. So at the end of your video, or at the end of your podcast, or at the end of your show notes, you can always say, hey guys, if you love this podcast, I'd love to have you give us a quick review. You can do it here, wherever it is that you want them to give the review. But remember that you need to be pointed as to where you're directing people to give those reviews. You want to try to keep the reviews, like on the platform if you can, not necessarily like in your website or on underneath your website content or on a social media platform. Those are great too, and we'll take what we can get, but we really want to direct them to the platform so that we generate interest on that platform and hopefully move up on the ratings for that. So now OPP. Okay, so this I want to talk about is other people's platform. So this is what OPP means, other people's platforms. And the reason I talk about this is because if you can get interviews for yourself as well on podcasts, or on a YouTube channel or on an Instagram Live or any of those types of things from other people, that also is a way for you to create PR for yourself. So public relations is a great thing to also add into your strategy, because it allows you to be exposed to new audiences as well. So where can you find people that want to interview you? Facebook groups are a great place to connect with other podcasters so that you can then get on their podcast as well. And having some sort of bio to just kind of say like, hey, this is what I can talk about on these different podcasts is a great way to help people see you as a potential guest to bring on. Twitter also has a rich podcasting community, so that if you want to be on Twitter and connect with other podcasters, you can. There's also places like Clubhouse and then Twitter Spaces. Instagram Lives are also considered a good place if you want to do any sort of collaborations or anything like that. And then an email list is always a great thing to have. So if you don't have one already, email marketing is not dead. It's definitely well and alive, and it's a great place to keep your customers if they enjoy your podcast, because all of these other areas we were talking about, you pushing out the information and we're hoping and praying that people see our podcast, hear about our podcast, and want to listen. But an email list, if people are on your email list, what that allows you to do is deliver that content to them directly, as opposed to crossing your fingers and hoping that they want to listen. So what you're allowed to do here is basically every time you create a podcast, within those first 24 hours, you're going to want to be sending out that information to any and everybody on your email list, so that the chances of them listening goes up significantly. And it tells the platform, hey, she's got a really good podcast episode and people are loving it because they're already going and listening to it. So that is a great way to really get people out there. So if you haven't started an email list, start one now. Make sure you ask people before you put them on it, if they can be on it. So if it's friends and family or people in your network or in your business, make sure you just let them know that, I'm starting an email list and I'd love to have you on it. And then they can say yes or no. The last thing is to create a blog on your website. So as I was talking about earlier with your podcast, you want to embed this onto your website, and generally people embed it into their blog. And basically a blog is just opening another page on your website, starting a new page on your website, calling it a blog, having it in your menu on your homepage, and then you start uploading that your podcast or any of your content onto this space. And your blog basically would consist of the audio file that comes from your podcast host platform. And then you have your show notes underneath, which is the words that help SEO find it. So the search engine optimization, that's what helps them find it and direct people to your blog to listen to your podcast. That's why your title is so important, like I was saying earlier. Okay. Now we want to talk about monetizing your podcast. Okay, so this is the fun part. So if you wanted to actually make money off of your podcast, here's the deal. Now, I will say with podcasting at this point, they don't have a lot of monetization like all on its own. You still need to go and make sure you get this monetization, these pieces added on to your actual podcast piece. So let me jump into this. So again, like we talked about call to actions earlier, your CTAs, you can use your podcast to promote any sort of services that you have. And you don't want to just do this. You want to do this probably, I'd probably say like 60% of the time, and then 40% of the time, you just want to give good, valuable information. But your calls to actions can be whatever you want them to be. So let's just say that you have a carpet business. And I don't know why carpet is the thing that keeps coming to me for a business, but let's use a carpet business. Okay, so you have a carpet business and you have a podcast where you talk about all things related to carpet. And people love your podcast and they trust you because you've told them to do things with their carpet and it works. That's fantastic. Now, let's say that you have a cleaner that you absolutely love using to clean carpet and it doesn't ruin it and it makes it great every single time. You can join an affiliate program for that cleaner. You can join Amazon affiliates, or you can join specifically from that cleaner if they have an affiliate program or a referral program. And you can add that link into your show notes for people to purchase whatever that cleaner is that you love, that you've raved about on your podcast. And every time you talk about that cleaner and someone clicks on it in the show notes, every time they click, you get money back from that. So they have to click and purchase the cleaner. So on Amazon, that's exactly how it works. If someone uses your affiliate link and you click on it and they click on it and then they go to Amazon and they purchase the cleaner and say they purchase 5 other things, then you get a kickback from anything that they've purchased. And when you have hundreds of people doing that, you're able to make extra income from these affiliate programs. So that's how that works. And that's one way to make money from your podcast. The next way to make money from your podcast is paid advertising, which is how most podcasts will make money. Either they're sponsored or people are paying a certain amount of money so that they can be advertised on your platform. So an average amount for this would be about $15 to $25 for every 1,000 listeners. And there are agencies that will do this for you, or if you wanted to do it yourself and keep track of all of that, you could do it yourself as well. But the way that you get these companies to do this for you is you would create some sort of a pitch deck for them to say, okay, this is how many listeners I have. This is how many people generally are on my email list. This is how many people basically that you personally have access to. So that means your email list, that means your social media, that means your listeners. All of those 3 things let the agencies or the companies that you're trying to entice to actually, pay for advertising on your platform. It lets them know how many listeners they might be reaching. So if it costs, for every episode, if it costs $25 because you have 1,000 listeners, and they know that they're going to get a return because your CTA is telling them to go get whatever this is because it was sponsored by by this company, those sponsorships tend to add up. Now you can do sponsorships per episode. You can do sponsorships per season if you decide to do like an episodic type of podcast where you do like maybe 12 episodes per season, and then the sponsor will pay for those 12 episodes as the sole sponsor or as one of 5 sponsors. There's lots of different ways you can break this down. Then that's how you were able to get yourself paid and how you monetize your podcast. So it really is a lot of sponsoring for people. Right now, as we speak, they don't have anything like YouTube where you put videos up, you gain subscribers, and then you might get paid, or you gain watch time and you might get paid, but YouTube pays you specifically, and they do all of the advertising piece. So for you as a podcaster, you would really be in charge of the paid advertising piece and the affiliate programs. Now, there are some agencies out there that will put your podcast out to some businesses so that they can decide if they want to sponsor you or not. But this is relatively new as of 2022. So that's just something you want to keep in mind for monetizing your podcast. Okay, so now we are going to wrap up. And this might be a good time for if there's any other questions, Emily, I can answer before I move on.
Let's see here. It doesn't look like we have any questions currently in the chat.
Okay, great. If you think of any questions before we end, go ahead and add them onto the chat, and then I will go ahead and answer them before I close out. So what we covered why you should start a podcast, how to plan your podcast, the equipment you'll need, the tips I had for you for recording your podcast, how to edit your episodes, how to market your podcast, and then also monetization for your podcast. So there are a lot of things here. There's a lot of information. As Emily said at the very beginning, we will send out the slide deck to you. And I just want to, again, I want to really drill this home before you go. Really and truly let go of perfection. Okay. You really do have a lot of space and time here to grow and evolve your business, but the key is really just to get started and to do it. If you're considering it, just go and do it, move forward. So I'll stop beating that one in, but any final questions?
Okay, I'm not seeing any.
Okay.
But yeah, just I did stick in the chat our evaluation. So yeah, let us know how we did today. If there's any suggestions you have for improving the webinar, or any other topics that you want us to present, we definitely love hearing that as well. So if you want to go ahead and click on that link, and then you can finish that after we're done with the webinar.
Okay. And then if you guys are in the area and you would like to be a part of the Shasta SBDC, I am a consultant there, obviously, and I love what I do there. So, and there are a whole host of other consultants that can help you with anything from QuickBooks to getting filling out your business plan or any sort of thing that you need related to your business. We have lots of excellent consultants there. So if you're in this area and you'd like to do that, please check us out. And if you're not in our area and you still want to go to an SBDC, you can find one at americassbdc.org. All right. Thank you guys so much for being here. And I hope you got the information that you were looking for. Go start those podcasts. Okay.
All right. Thanks, Ashlee.